Hey, welcome back to Well, That's Interesting. That title makes no sense. Please, make it make sense. Edition. Today is episode 187, an amphibian. So bizarre. It tells a platypus to hold my secretions and the man who overdosed on milk. My friends. I really don't know what else to say about the creature and the events we're about to cover, other than they're just weird. And I'm talking weird even for this show. I mean, if you're a long-time listener, I could say without a doubt, you and I have been on some fucked up magical journeys that have taken us around the world, under oceans, and even into the sky on some occasions, thanks to the mind-blowing work and strange obsessions of many a researcher. What I mean to say is that over the nearly 4 years of this podcast, we've racked up one hell of a laundry list of strange creatures. Just off the top of my head, in episode 140, we talked about an insect that flings pee with a butt catapult and rats that could seal up their vaginas. Yeah. In In-Betweenie 068, we couldn't look away from a comb jelly with a transient anus and another animal friend with 1,500 legs. Now, that sounds like a lot until you remember. Way the fuck back in In-Betweenie 037, we focused on a worm with 500 butts. Honorable mention goes to orange crocodiles, giant bird-eating centipedes, Canada's gigantic invasive wild pigs, Minnesota's gigantic invasive goldfish, a seabird called the frigate who cloud hops to get around, and here is to every animal known to use parthenogenesis to continue their species. Oh, and of course, to sharks, who have been on this earth for so long, they've seen our solar system revolve around the entire Milky Way twice. Now, every one of these animals deserves an appropriately sized trophy for being so damn unusual. But what if I told you there's one creature out there that deserves an inappropriately sized trophy because they're so extra? I mean, a bizarre creature, just so bizarre that it makes these guys look meh. In the first half of the show, I'll have the absolute honor of introducing you to a species that belongs to an order of amphibians that if you took one look at any of its characteristics on paper, you'd say, girl, no, there's no way. That is not an amphibian. You'd look me dead in the eye and call me a liar. Well, prepare yourself. This creature's let's say, unique physical characteristics are not even the crowning achievement of its peculiarities. No way in hell. When you hear about what females of this species do to feed their young, it reaches a whole new level of TMI. There will be orifices and milky liquids involved. Then after the break... Speaking of milk, we are heading back to Old Medical Oddities Lane, where we'll be covering a case from 2012. The title of today's episode says it all. There was a man, and he somehow successfully overdosed on cow's milk. You probably have a lot of questions, like, how? And how? Well, yes, we will get to it. We will talk about how and why, and what your blood looks like when it happens. Of course I have photos. What, how dare you even ask? By the way, I'm Jill Chacha, and if this is your first time listening, welcome to the flock, my delicious business goose. To begin, I'm going to ask you to hold off on eating and maybe even drinking anything for the next 30 minutes or so, and I'm going to ask you to put on some breathable clothing and bug repellent, because we're about to head on over to where the star of our show calls home. All right, everyone, please imagine the fucking Earth. Thank you. Now please trace your finger around the equator, paying special attention to Central America, South America, including all of Brazil, Western and Eastern Africa, Southeast Asia, India, Bangladesh, and Nepal, just to name a few. My friends, these wet tropical regions are where you can find a group of amphibians called caecilians. And what I'm about to tell you is going to throw everything you know about amphibians out of the goddamn window. To help brace for impact, please head on over to our social media stuffs and tap on today's post. The first image you're going to come across is definitely worth 1,000 words. I'm actually going to bring up the photo myself, and I'm going to give you a second. Okay, now, what you're seeing here, my nippled business goose, is not, and I repeat, is not an earthworm. No. And no, despite the clutch of soft eggs this creature is curled around, no, this is not a snake either. This is an amphibian. Caecilians, as they're called, and whose name is New Latin for blind ones, are a group of limbless, worm-shaped, or serpentiny, snake-shaped animals with extremely tiny, or sometimes completely non-existent eyes. Their dark purplish skin is also pretty striking. Now, if we stop here and already contrast this animal to what we've learned about amphibians as children, nothing makes sense. They look nothing like frogs, toads, or salamanders, or even fucking newts. Well, we've just begun. We've barely scratched the surface here. By the end of this segment, you'll be equal parts nauseous and amazed by the evolutionary path caecilians have taken over their 200 million years of existence. Well, speaking of which, let's get into why all 220-ish known species of caecilians decided to yeet eyes and limbs. Well, they're all about the burrowing lifestyle, not so much the aquatic one. They spend most of their lives underground, using muscles to push their triangular-like heads through the moist dirt of these regions. They then pull the rest of their body up, like in waves. Like an average amphibian. Absolutely not. In the dirt, they spend their days looking for earthworms, termites, lizards, moth larvae, and shrimp to chow down on. But I have to be honest here. It looks as though caecilians' diets really depends on their size and location. If I can get this, species range from a wee 3 inches to 5 goddamn feet long. 5 feet. And if that sounds like too much, I agree. For context, I'm 5'3". And unlike me, however, the larger ones have been seen eating newborn rodents, salmon eggs, and veal in laboratory conditions. I don't know where the veal came from. I guess they just eat whatever you bring them, which is very polite, but also very not amphibian. Again. Now this is weird, but we can get weirder. Except for one lungless species, yes, one lungless one, all caecilians have lungs, but why the fuck not? They also use their skin or mouths for oxygen absorption, which is more worm-like. Their left lung has been consistently found to be smaller than the right one, which is an adaptation that's also found in, you guessed it, snakes. Sure. Despite their lack of visual input, they get around just fine, thanks to tentacles located on either side of their head, between their practically non-existent eyes and nostrils. Their nostrils are functional. They could hear, but of course, they have to throw a curveball to make up for just how average their nostrils are. According to our internet best friend, the wiki, the middle ear consists of only the stapes bone and oval window, which transfer vibrations to the inner ear through a reentrant fluid circuit seen in reptiles. Okay, adult species within the family of Scolecomorphidae. Nailed it. They lack both the stapes and an oval window, making them the only known amphibians missing all of the components of a middle ear apparatus. End quote. Sure. I mean, by now, my equally flamboyant business goose, you may be thinking this creature is the poster child of you do you. Holy fuck, you have no idea. Let's get into it. Join me, will you, back in May of 2023, when a new study on caecilians just dropped, and honestly, I don't think anyone was prepared for it. Quote, "It's a remarkably weird thing," said David Blackburn, the curator of herpetology at the Florida Museum and author of the study. David said this to Sophia Quaglia of the New York Times. He continued, quote, "When you open up their stomachs, guess what? They have skin inside their stomach." End quote. My friends, allow me to clarify. Allow me to start with something heartwarming. In the amphibian world, few parents care for their offspring after being hatched from eggs or after a live birth. In every species of caecilians, however, the mothers are committed, nay, overly committed guardians, and I'm about to drop one example of how much so. For David's study, he and his team dug for weeks through the tropical rainforests of southeastern Cameroon, ultimately collecting 29 caecilians of the species Herpele squalostoma. Yes. The researchers then analyzed and sequenced the microbial DNA from the skin and guts of this sample, which composed of 6 adult males, 9 females, 3 of the mothers, and 14 young. Put a pin in that. The team also conducted 5,000 microbe DNA sequences from the surrounding environment. 5,000 sequences. Now, after all the clickety-clack calculations were done, it turns out a minute amount of the bacteria found in the offspring matched what was recovered from nearby leaves, water, soil, the environment. Up to 20%, however, 20% of their gut microbiome matched that to their mother's skin. I will give you one good guess as to how that could possibly be. Okay, if you said anything like, "Oh, the mothers must feed their own skin to their newborns," you're right. Remember that quote from David when he dissected the young and found skin in their stomachs? Yeah. Now, this sounds intense, and it is. But good news, it gets even more intense. For caecilians who give birth to fully formed offspring, not eggs, but fully formed offspring, the developing fetuses had already spent their time feeding off the skin in their mother's oviduct. Yeah. Yeah, the feelings you're feeling, I told you this was going to happen. I told you. Oh God, for caecilians who lay eggs, don't worry. It's graphic, too. These young hatch and crawl all over their mother's body, taking off bits and pieces. Mark Wilkinson, an evolutionary biologist at the Natural History Museum in London, Mark was the first person to bear witness to this kind of motherly love/behavior and published a paper on it back in 2006. He also discovered that the skin of caecilian mothers was twice as thick as that of adult females without offspring. Quote, "They're kind of lactating in a way." End quote, he told the New York Times. Yeah. One version of lactating for them is growing extra skin. My friends, I'm sure you're speechless amongst other emotions, but I'm going to need you. I'm going to need you to dig deep right now and gather your most inner business goose because, yes, there's more. Since we're on the topic of lactation and their versions of it, we need to talk about ass milk. Yes, I've saved the best for last. Please join me. Will you? Now at the cacao plantations in the Atlantic forests of Brazil, which takes up like a solid chunk of the country's southeast corner. It was here Carlos Jared, a researcher at the Butantan Institute of Sao Paulo, Brazil, and his team also spent weeks digging for caecilians. But this isn't Jared's first fucking rodeo. He has been studying these elusive as fuck creatures since 1987. I mean, I can't blame him. Everything about these animals is fascinating and unexpected. Quote, "It's like they're from another planet. For me, they're like Martians," Jared told Sophia of the New York Times. Well, hang on to your non-lactating cheeks because things are going to get even more out of this world. Jared and his team hit the caecilian jackpot, so to speak, as they managed to collect 16 mothers of the Siphonops annulatus species and their hatchlings. Each mother had between 4 and 13 newborns. Now, if you head on over to our social media stuffs, you will see screenshots of the videos the team took of mothers curled around their squirmy little babies. In fact, the parents didn't budge for 2 whole months. And what the team noticed during this time was fucking wild. Now, what I'm about to describe is a lot, but you came this far and I am so proud of you. And if you don't turn this episode off after or during the quote I'm about to drop here, well, you are the top tier of Business Goose. All right, here we go. Quote, "Each mother never left her litter, not even to feed, and the hatchlings wriggled up around on her back and nuzzled up to the end of her body. This is where offspring excitedly compete to nibble a white viscous fluid from the mother's cloaca, placing their heads almost inside it. The puppies suck on this milk several times a day, growing to more than twice their size in their first week. When the pharmacologists examined the substance, which is produced in special glands in the caecilian mother's oviduct, they found it was fatty and rich in carbohydrates, just like mammal's milk." End quote. Okay, are you still with me? I had to get through that real quick. It's okay to wheeze, just breathe. But you heard me right. Caecilians have holes, specifically cloacas, just like birds and fucking dinosaurs. Not only that, the females of this species, at least, can produce milk that's very similar to us, and it comes out of this hole. And if you need a refresher, cloacas are a one-stop shop kind of hole. They're used to poop, pee, mate, lay eggs, and now used to feed offspring with milk. This is why, my enlightened business goose, this is why I think this animal deserves to be a top 3 weirdest animal. I honestly don't know what can beat it. Let's give it a hefty round of applause with our limbs. Holy shit. And because we deserve this for going through all of this, I'm going to try and cleanse our palate. Let's leave on a cute note. Jared's Caecilian-loving team also happened to catch this first. Quote, "The pups cry for food. They emit sounds like click, 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 click. It's like a begging behavior," said Pedro El Melho Fontana, also of the Butantan Institute, to the New York Times. Milk feeding and this type of communication between parents and the young has not been found in other amphibians. It's very unique. End quote. To say the fucking least, Pedro, Jesus. Yeah, it's unique. After the break, our adventures with and our complicated emotions about milk will continue. We need to talk about a study simply called Milk Intoxication, a case report. You won't believe your ears or eyes again. Stay tuned.
Find what you love what you find. A total wine and more. There's so much waiting for you. Spirits and beer, thousands of wines.
Drink responsibly, B21.
Hey there, I'm Dylan Lewis, one of the hosts of Motley Fool Money. Each weekday on Motley Fool Money, we talk through the business news you need to know and the stories moving stocks on Wall Street. On weekends, we dive into the industries shaping tomorrow and host the experts, authors, and executives that understand them. Tune in for insights, a long-term perspective on investing, and of course, stock ideas. Plenty of them. To quote a listener, it pays to listen. Check us out and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
And we're back. We are so back. And my friends, I'm going to ask you to charge up the old time machine and bring along some dairy-free snacks because we're heading on back to 2012. Now, we just landed in the pristine nation known as the Netherlands, famous for its canals, tulip fields, and windmills. And after this episode, it'll also be known as the place where a man overdosed from drinking too much cow's milk. An absolute first of its kind, and I'm sorry, Florida, they beat you to it. Join me, will you, at the Mestad Hospital in Rotterdam. And for my fellow geographically challenged Americans, don't worry, I've got you. Please, everyone, imagine France. Beautiful. Now point to the northeast border. Okay, there is Belgium. Yum. Now move your finger to its northeast border, and voila, here is the Netherlands. And like I said, we've arrived at the Mestad Hospital, where a 54-year-old man checked himself in and reported to have been experiencing some concerning as fuck complications. He told the medical staff for the past 2 days he had shortness of breath, had been excessively sweating, and had an unquenchable thirst, but was passing large amounts of urine at the same time. My friends, he wasn't fucking exaggerating. After taking some vitals, the staff learned he had a pulse rate of 138 beats per minute and a respiration rate of 40 breaths per minute. That's more than 2 heartbeats every second and nearly a breath every second. This is dangerous. But believe it or not, it's not the most dangerous thing this man was facing. Not by a long shot. Let's get into it. After inquiring about the last several days, the staff also learned that the patient had been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes by his general practitioner and was prescribed metformin. And I gave metformin the old Google, and according to our friends over at medlineplus.gov, quote, metformin helps to control the amount of glucose or sugar in your blood. It decreases the amount of glucose you absorb from your food and the amount of glucose made by your liver. Metformin also increases your body's insulin, or your body's response to insulin, a natural substance that controls the amount of glucose in the blood. End quote. So, in sum, this little white pill is usually prescribed for type 2 diabetes, and for a lot of people, it helps. But our patient, after taking the meds, he was still dealing with type 2 diabetes symptoms like the extreme thirst and excessive peeing. To get a better understanding of his condition, the staff went on to take a blood sample. And holy shit, what followed might be the fastest diagnosis to ever appear on this show. My strong-boned business goose, you need to see what the medical staff saw when they drew his blood. Please, sit the fuck down and open up our social media stuffs, tap on today's post, and swipe through all those oh-so-adorable photos of Sicilian mothers and their babies. When you do that, behold 2 full vials, each about half of which are not filled with blood, but milk. Yes, you heard me. Milk came out of this man's arm. Needless to say, the staff had additional questions. According to the wonderfully titled study, Milk Intoxication, a Case Report, the patient tried to quench his thirst by drinking approximately 22 liters, or 5.5 gallons of full-fat cow's milk per day over the past 2 days. I will say that again. He drank 10 gallons of milk in 2 days. Ugh. I don't know. I feel like that's more gross than the Sicilians feeding offspring through their literal asshole. But maybe not. Anyway, if this sounds like a lot, you are absolutely right in more ways than one. Quote, according to the nutritional value of milk, this implies he consumed 1,540 grams or 54 ounces of protein, 1,980 grams or 70 ounces of sugar, and 1,496 grams or 53 ounces of fat in just 2 days. End quote from the study. My friends, he was on a milk bender. It's a medical first. Yeah, round of applause. You're absolutely right. That deserves an applause. Oh. Now, you probably have a few questions like, why, in God's name, did he choose to drink milk? And wait, how the fuck did it end up in his bloodstream? Great questions. I don't know why milk was his beverage of choice. I guess it's his jam. But I can tell you why all that excess milk ended up in his veins. Well, cow's milk is full of triglycerides, which according to our other good friends over at heartuk.org.uk is, quote, a combination of 3 fatty acids and glycerol, a form of glucose and a simple sugar. Triglycerides are our main source of energy, and as they are so important, we have 2 supplies, one from our diet and one made by the liver. When we eat foods containing triglycerides, such as meat, dairy products, cooking oils, and fats, they are absorbed by our intestines and packaged into parcels of fat and protein. These carry the triglycerides in the bloodstream to our tissues to be used for energy straight away or stored for later. End quote. Our patient went a little overboard with the milk, and his body was like, shrug, I guess I'll just funnel all this extra fuel into the bloodstream. Now, if having lots and lots and lots of fat and sugar in your bloodstream sounds like it's bad, you are on a roll. Yes, it's very not good. Heart UK reports that the average person's triglyceride level should be below 2.3 millimoles per liter. Itty bitty, 2.3. Well, get this. To figure out our patient's levels, the team sent the vials onto the on-site lab. But his blood was so thick with milk, quote, unfortunately, the chemistry analyzer in the laboratory could not examine this particular blood sample. End quote from the study. Oh my God. The medical staff actually had to perform what's called an arterial blood gas measurement, which is performed by a completely different type of analyzer. My friends, it showed a glucose level of 75 millimoles per liter. And another lab test revealed his serum triglyceride levels to be 191 millimoles per liter. He was basically on the verge of a self-induced acute pancreatitis. So, his ass was rushed to the intensive care unit. There the staff had to get the milk out of his bloodstream and replace it with good old-fashioned plasma. And my friends, once again, you need to see this plasma exchange to believe it. Yeah, head on over to our social media stuffs and swipe past those vials. That large canister, you see right there, filled with what looks to be white paint, is what came out of this patient to be replaced with plasma, which is the liquid base for blood. It actually makes up about 55% of the body's total blood volume, so AKA, it's important. That's a lot of milk. Okay, in addition to the plasma exchange, the patient was treated with short-acting insulin, more metformin, and, quote, lifestyle interventions, end quote. The study did not elaborate. Now, this hospital is rated 3.3 out of 5 on Google, but this treatment deserves a 5-star rating, y'all, because thanks to the medical staff, in just 6 weeks after discharge, the patient was in good health, with a slightly elevated triglyceride level of 2.8. It's better than 191. This guy can tell his friends, thanks to this hospital and this medical staff, he is the only man known to overdose on milk and survive. Thank you for listening, rating, subscribing, and telling your friends about Sicilians. Not Sicilians, but Sicilians. They have cloacas. That's just the start. And then you could just round out that conversation with the guy who overdosed on milk in the Netherlands. God damn. A delicious size thanks to the folks over at Airwave Media, the podcast network to which WTI belongs. If you love this show, and you do, you love the other podcasts in this family, and please, stay interesting.